Hi friends, Father Kerry Walters here, pastor of Holy Spirit American National Catholic Church, and this is another Holy Spirit moment, this one on Atheism's Big Mistake. I think it's entirely possible for reasonable people to reasonably disagree about whether or not God exists, but I also think that it's absolutely important for all disputants in that discussion to be on the same page about the definition of the God that they're discussing. And I'm sorry to say that for the most part, atheists and theists talk at cross purposes to one another, because atheists ascribe to theists belief in a God which theists simply do not hold. And as a consequence, whenever atheists reject that caricature of God, which they claim atheists hold, they're strawmanning. That is, they are setting up an argument that is flimsy and hence easy to knock down. Now, before telling you exactly what I think atheism's big mistake is and why I think it's a big mistake, let me offer you a couple of examples of that mistake. One is taken from Bertrand Russell's 1927 essay, Why I Am Not a Christian, and the other is taken from Richard Dawkins' 2006, The God Delusion. Let's look at Russell first. This was a lecture that Russell gave, and so its tone tends to be rather light and amusing, but he does do his best to try and show that Christianity in particular and theism in general is not a worldview that any reasonable person could hold. And that's because Russell thinks there are no good reasons to believe in God. And the primary argument that he uses against God belief is his criticism of what's known as the argument from causation. When we argue from causation, what we try to show is that there must be a first cause, a divine first cause for all of the effects that we encounter in the world. Well, this is what Russell says. He says, if everything that exists is the effect of a cause, then the cause that brought everything into existence must its likewise be the effect of a prior cause. And that prior cause must likewise be the effect of a prior cause, and so on and so forth. You get the idea, I think. What Russell is trying to say is that postulating God as a first cause somehow violates the general rule that everything which is has been caused by something prior to itself. Therefore, if we take his criticism of the causation argument seriously, there's no good reason to believe that there is a first cause that we can call God. Richard Dawkins also attacks the argument from causation. He doesn't do it in a terribly sophisticated way, but it nonetheless has proven to be an influential argument among his admirers. He says this: if we look at the world around us, we see that it is a highly complex system of cause and effect. And the only thing that could possibly have brought it into existence is something else that is at least as complex a system. And if that's the case, then something at least as complex as the complex cause of the complex system must likewise exist, ... Once again, we see the same move to an infinite regress on Dawkins' part that we saw with Russell's argument. Now, I don't know if the argument from causation is a persuasive one. I actually have my doubts about it. But that's not the point right now. The point is that these two criticisms of the argument from causation illustrate atheism's big mistake. And what is that mistake? Simply this. Atheists tend to think of God as just another thing in the world. A thing in the world to which everything else that we can say about the world naturally applies. God is just a being. It is a superior being, according to these atheists, true, but it's just another being, and therefore the same temporal and spatial qualities that we ascribe to other beings in the world can be ascribed to God. Such that, for example, if every being in the world is the effect of a cause, and if God is a being, then God must be caused. And that cause of God must in turn be caused, and so on and so forth. So the fundamental mistake of atheism is to mistake God for just an item in the world, just a being in the world. And once one makes that move, then one necessarily, in order to be consistent, has to say that all of the laws that govern beings in the world must likewise apply to the being called God. Now, don't misunderstand me. I don't think that atheists actually articulate to themselves that God is just another being, but they speak about God in such a way that they must have that assumption in the back of their mind. Why is that a distortion of the God that theists believe in, and hence is a talking at cross purposes in any dialogue about God between atheists and theists? Well, simply this. For the theist, God isn't a being, isn't just another item in the world, isn't even something that belongs to the category of beings. God is instead the necessary condition for the existence of everything else. God is a necessary condition for the existence of the entire class of beings that exist in reality, from quasars and quarks to stones and butterflies and pebbles. And as a consequence, because God is the ground of being for everything that is, God can't be included in the set of all beings. Because the set of all beings, we know from experience, simply doesn't have the ability, doesn't have the potency, doesn't have the action to be able to create all other beings. Now, atheists may disagree that that is not what God is, but then they're going to have to come up with an argument for establishing their rejection of that notion of God, instead of sticking with the understanding of God as just another being in the world who can be quickly dismissed by the kinds of arguments that people like Russell and Dawkins throw against the causation argument for the existence of God. That's what you want to take home with you today, it seems to me, my friends. Whether or not God exists may be an open question. Whether or not the argument from causation may be a good one or a not so good one, it is certainly the case that the kind of God that atheists typically repudiate is not at all the understanding of God that theists have. If it were, theists would be sadly mistaken. I'm Father Kerry Walters, and this has been another Holy Spirit moment. Thank you so much for listening, and I will see you next time.